energy was quite profound, which was obviously nice. But what that translated into, which was kind of crazy, is I'm doing about 20 one-on-one sessions a week now, which 4 weeks ago I wasn't doing. So it's just kind of crazy how that, like, your mindset translates into your energy and your vibe. And obviously the whole time you're saying, oh, I might be gone in a month, you're not attracting that energy of signing up one-on-one clients because it's location specific. Yeah, bro, I'm probably going to be here for a little while, mate, really, until things settle down in the UK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, jealous.
How are you?
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, place to be, eh?
Just a quick one with the Zoom, and we've got we might get one or two more, but Natalie's waiting to come in. How can I lock it to like you? How do we do that in Zoom? Is that
I believe you click on view and then you like change to gallery view, and then you click on the person in the three circles and then you pin that person, I think.
Right, I've just spotlighted you, so hopefully it's just you then now on that. With regards to me, yeah, it's good. Like I've got this transition. I dipped my toe into like online coaching throughout the meal prep journey, and just realized it wasn't giving me what I wanted out of it, really. I didn't have the free time that I wanted, constantly had to be in the kitchen on the weekends. And like even with Susie, we were like, oh, well, honeymoon or anything like that, or going on holiday, we have to go on holiday from like Sunday to Thursday and then have to go back into the kitchen to cook. And it's just like, where do I want my life to lead, if that makes sense? And we want to be able to go to Bali and Thailand and travel and do some bits first before it's sort of like settled down type thing. So
yeah, awesome, bro. Yeah. I'm excited for you. I think online coaching is great, obviously. So yeah, man, I'm buzzing with you. I look forward to chatting more about that with you, bro. So yeah, sick.
Right. So if I admit Natalie, and then we can get moving with this. Yeah.
If you also, mate, if it's all right, just also make me like a co-host, and then I believe that will allow me to share my screen. And then at one little bit, I might just use a little diagram to kind of help. So just make me a co-host, and then let me.
I'm gonna have to do that. I'll just make you the host.
Cool. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Yeah, I can screen share now. Perfect.
Sweet.
Cool.
Natalie, can you just, if you can hear us, can you just say yes in the chat? If she's there. I think she's in. I think it's connecting in now.
Yeah.
I'll get questions up. Is she in?
I apologise for my webcam quality. It's all right. It's not great, but it should do for the audio and the screen share.
Yeah. She's still
cool.
Yeah, I think she's in now.
Awesome. Yeah, audio should be on there. Are you gonna? Is this live streaming into your Facebook group as well, mate?
I haven't been able to do that. I'm just going to record it and then pop it in there later.
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah,
there's something you need to change in the settings in Zoom before you do it. And then if you do that at the bottom, it gives you the option of just live streaming it straight into a Facebook group, which is kind of cool. It just saves the upload part after, but it's something you just need to change in the settings first.
I know, honestly, the Facebook groups finding that it's taking forever to upload videos. So I've got all these things that I want to be able to give to the guys. And like, I think I filmed a 50-minute mastermind on mindset, and it took like a day to upload. So, but
yeah, mate, I normally link out to either Loom or YouTube or whatever, then just post the link in the Facebook group, because Facebook is super slow at uploading. Yeah,
I know. Right, let's get into it, I guess. So you said if you do an intro into like yourself, that'd be amazing. And then we can get into the bits that you said about mindful eating and like digestive issues to start with before we sort of head into a Q&A.
Yeah, awesome, mate. Firstly, thank you very much for inviting me on. It's a subject that I'm pretty passionate about, just because it's unfortunately pretty complex and there's so much individual variation and considerations when it comes to gut health. And as cliche as it sounds, one thing that works for one person might really not for another. So kind of on my own journey and working with clients myself, you know, there's nothing obviously more frustrating than kind of not being able to fix a client, so to speak, which has kind of really led me down this kind of rabbit hole. So definitely not a specialist, definitely not a medical professional, but definitely an area that I'm very interested in and have put a lot of time into the last few years. But just very quickly on me, no one's really ever too interested in that, but the part that's relevant to kind of the gut health part is when I first started coaching just over 7 years ago, which is where I met Johnny. Well, I first started at David Lloyd and he was a PT there as well. I actually ended up with really, really bad acid reflux. Like, it was severe. It was incredibly painful. I couldn't sleep at night. I was having to sit upright in bed, and I lost about 12 kilos because I couldn't keep any food down. And to this day, I still don't know exactly what caused and triggered that, which is, you know, very frustrating because I'm a big believer in trying to get to your root causes. So obviously, you know, you can fix them and stop it happening again. But the point kind of here is that I went to the doctor, you know, as you do when you've got a health problem, right? And this isn't me saying doctors are bad or you shouldn't go to the doctor, like, not at all, you know, don't get me wrong. But for me, my doctor kind of made me a lot worse, because what happened was I went to the doctor, I've got this really bad acid reflux, and of course you get prescribed antacids. Last time I checked, I could be wrong now, but they were the second most prescribed drug in the UK, and they were worth about 2 billion. So we're talking about something that's very easily and readily handed out without ever trying to figure out anyone's root causes, just prescribed antacids if you have acid reflux. Now, it made mine worse. So I was like, okay, this is a bit weird. It's getting even worse now. Like, I'm really bad. I'm in a lot of pain. I went back. Here's some more antacids. Same thing again. Third time I've gone back. Here's some stronger antacids. And at this point, I've gone from it being annoying and painful to in agony. I can't sleep. I'm just not eating anything. And this was maybe like a 5 or 6 week time frame. And I'm like, something's, you know, not right here. I didn't know much about gut health at this point. I was only 18. So I started looking into it myself. And it turns out that low stomach acid and high stomach acid can have the exact same symptoms, one of them being acid reflux, like that acid coming up. So I was like, okay, if antacids are making my acid reflux a lot worse, they're suppressing my stomach acid even more, maybe I don't have too much stomach acid, maybe I've got not enough. So I just kind of treated it myself from that angle of, right, let's boost my natural stomach acid instead of treating it like I've got too much. And I was fine. I fixed that problem and I've never had an issue since. And as I said, I still don't unfortunately know exactly why I had that issue in the first place, which is a shame. But the point is that, you know, the doctor kind of basically made me worse by not really taking the time to try and figure out any of my other symptoms, by not correlating any other issues I might have been experiencing, because that is so important with gut health. Whenever I've got a new client, we really need to paint the picture of what are all your symptoms, not just in your digestive system, but your whole body. And when we kind of have that more complete picture of all of your symptoms, all of your issues, and all of your history in terms of medications, etc., now we will have a much better idea of what's actually happening. But we need to dig that bit deeper. So that's hopefully what we'll do on this call, is, you know, empower you and educate you to kind of know what area you should look in for yourself. And then, you know, hopefully, unlike me, you won't have to continually make your problem worse for 6 weeks before you can actually find the right way of dealing with it. So yeah, long story short, I managed to fix that by treating it the exact opposite way that my doctor was trying to treat it. And that's where I kind of went, oh, this, you know, gut health stuff's kind of interesting and potentially complicated, because, you know, it wasn't like the doctor got it wrong. It was actually a complete 180, right? It was the complete opposite of what he was saying. And that kind of led me down that rabbit hole ever since, of obviously trying to, you know, look at this kind of bigger picture of digestion and digestive health. So yeah, that's just a little bit of me, and specifically how I'm interested in this area a little bit more. And then, you know how it is, Johnny, your first year of PTing, you know, you don't really know too much about things like gut health and nutrition, but your clients obviously want you to know that kind of stuff, you know, and like you know, you're an awesome PT that really cares about your clients. So when they're coming to you with these problems and you don't really know how to fix them, you're going away and actually spending time researching that. So, you know, IBS, which is a very umbrella term, I had several clients with that. And, you know, no one same approach worked for any of them. I had to put them on pretty different approaches. You know, one, it turned out, had SIBO. We had to go low FODMAP, and we can get into that. You know, one had to go for an autoimmune, an AIP, an autoimmune paleo style diet. So there was all these completely different things that on paper look like they don't make sense, like they're just completely different and random to each other, but work for that person. So this kind of like process of how do we collect these symptoms and try and figure out what it is for you that we need to do is quite important, because otherwise we might just be you know, barking up the wrong tree, so to speak, maybe not addressing the problem, maybe even making it worse. So yeah, that was often a little bit of a tangent, but hopefully people watching this with some of the questions they've thrown in, which are some awesome questions, by the way. I was very impressed, because what a lot of them do is they really look at gut health and other areas, you know, such as bloating, hair, stress, and that's awesome. So a lot of your clients are along the right lines already by kind of understanding how you can't separate your digestive system from the rest of your health. And it's just a case of knowing where to look and how to pull that together, which can really help in terms of then, you know, going down the right path, so to speak, on addressing your problems.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I myself, is there an echo?
No, sorry, do I have one, mate?
It seems like I can hear myself, but we'll roll
Perfect,
with it.
this ends.
Yeah, I mean, I was in hospital for 4 days straight, I think it was, a few years ago, with these awful abdominal cramps. Like, it would bend me in half, right? And I had no idea what it was. And when I went to the hospital, exactly the same almost as your like story of they don't really know what the problem is, and then they're almost looking at it from a like more of a medical point of view of like, can we fix this person immediately? If not, I don't really care about them. And it got to the end of the 4 days, and they were like, well, we don't really know what it is. You can stay here if you want on morphine and painkillers and all this other shit, right? Or you can go home. And I was like, well, I'd rather not have to just have more drugs for the sake of having drugs. I'll just leave. And they never ended up sorting the problem out or finding out what it was. And it kind of just went away through me just removing bits from my diet, much the same as like you did, just trying to figure it out on my own. Every now and then it comes back. But I genuinely think it was down to sort of like carb killers, grenade carb killers. I think it was that there was a specific ingredient in that or protein.
Yeah, the sugar alcohols.
Yeah, it literally like someone would punch me in the stomach. It was awful. So I find the whole thing interesting as well, like how different things can affect different people. And I think when we get into the questions, I think we can get into some like nitty gritty of different little tweaks that we can use and actually like really try and give some people some value. So I'm looking forward to as much as everybody else, hopefully, that watches along. Yeah, so let's get into it.
Yeah, I mean, let's just touch on two things that you said there quickly, if that's right, because that was awesome. And so one thing there, and this isn't, you know, anti-Western medicine or anything like that, not at all, but the problem that we kind of have when we're looking at potentially quite holistic and full body problems is we go to the medical professional, and exactly as you said, Johnny, it's kind of just trying to address often the symptoms there and then for the most part. And one big problem we have, especially in Western medicine, is this lag time between research and it being taught. So I follow a lot of doctors on purpose, and I follow a lot of naturopathic doctors and a lot of RDs and people that have kind of gone through the educational route in different ways. And what's really interesting from my own looking at the research versus what a lot of these medical doctors are saying, what a lot of these MDs are saying, is often it's not wrong, but often because of what they've taught and they are only learning from their kind of like pre-established curriculum through medical school, is sometimes the research hasn't quite caught up to what's in there. And that's pretty interesting. And it does just mean that occasionally things are missed. So yeah, and also as well, when you're kind of going to your GP, like they are a general practitioner. Now, that means they are way smarter than I am, of course, but they are still a general practitioner. So, you go to your GP, and if you're lucky, they'll then refer you out to your registered dietitian, who then, if you're lucky, might refer you to the next specialist, depending on what area of your digestive system you're having problems with. Because, we've literally got the stomach, the liver, the gallbladder, the intestines, the colon. Like it's a big it's a bigger area and it's very complex. So we then have some different specialists within that. So it's quite a lengthy process, and subsequently, yeah, you do really have to be your own best researcher. And normally what you end up getting told is we need to go through this 5 R's model, and the first one's remove. The first one's always remove. It's some form of elimination diet. The exact application of that is going to, ideally depend on as much individual context and symptoms we can collect as possible. But it always starts with an R. It always starts with, that R, which is removal. And, if we've got an idea of what it might be, like it's your carb killers, then great. Like we've got an idea of where we can start. If we don't, we often sometimes have to throw quite a big blanket elimination diet at it and remove a lot just to get that improvement in symptoms quickly, because it's never nice to have whatever the symptoms are. And then we reintroduce. At one at a time, and then obviously we can keep a trigger diary, but we can get into that in a little bit more detail. But yeah, what you said there was spot on, and that's I do think a lot of the time with this stuff, you need to be your own best researcher, and it always starts with the first R, which is removal. And what have I done? Sorry. What that kind of means, I'm just admitting someone in. What that kind of means, unfortunately, is that it can take a bit of work, and this is the problem with any type of healing, whether we're talking about hormonal stuff, the digestive system, whatever it might be. Everyone wants to get told, this is the exact problem that you have. This is exactly why it happened. And here is exactly what you need to do. Mm-hmm. Okay, that would be ideal, wouldn't it? But unfortunately, that's not really how it works a lot of the time. There's normally not an exact root cause. The root cause is often multifactorial. And often sometimes it's a situation where, it's like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? Often you might be like, oh, nothing's changed. But what you were doing is a lot of stuff that might be impacting your health, causing these symptoms, and then just one small thing is enough to, spill you over, so to speak. And that can be really hard, because then it can be hard to figure out what's actually going on, which is why this process of collecting data, subjective and non-subjective, like your symptoms, like your triggers, like how you feel, etc., is so important. So you can actually start putting this puzzle together for yourself, because there's usually not one root cause. It's normally multifactorial, and then the solution to that, unfortunately, is normally not one specific thing. Normally, often it's trial and error at first, unfortunately, and then often, under, let's say there's like 3 root causes for argument's sake, there might need to be 2 things that you kind of need to do for each of them, which might mean there's kind of like 6 considerations, if want for a better phrase, that you need to do for one problem. And that's where a lot of people end up just going, this is too difficult, screw it, I'm just going to live with these health problems and take some pills to mask it, which is unfortunate, whether it's antacids, whether it's tablets for constipation, whether it's the birth control pill to fix your hormones, which doesn't even make sense, but that's not the point. And that's the unfortunate position we end up in. And this is why I'm so passionate about coaching, is we can hold people accountable to actually doing the work weekly that is needed to heal, and hopefully help them to minimize the trial and error and the frustration and the stress that it can cause in terms of finding the right approach for them to fixing their problems. Because some people have no problem with gluten and wheat. Some people have a problem with dairy. Some people can't eat FODMAPs, which are random foods like bananas and stuff. Other people need less fiber, actually, ironically, which is one of the questions, which is great. Some people need more fiber. Like, a lot of this stuff can be contradictory. So the point kind of from this part is be your own best researcher. Try and collect as much as you can in terms of symptoms and triggers, and we'll get into that a little bit more as well in terms of like what to collect and how. But if you can take anything away from this so far, it's you have to kind of put a little bit of work into the collecting of the symptoms, keeping that diary, and trying to kind of put this puzzle together a little bit, and then go away and just research, like, okay, what do these 3 foods that I have a problem with have in common? Okay, they are all nightshades, or they are all legumes, or they are all high in histamine. Because often the foods we have issues with can appear really random, but actually when we know where to look, sometimes they can fall under these predetermined categories of, for example, FODMAPs. Dairy is a more obvious one, but dairy, legumes, etc. So but let's take a step laterally for a second anyway, and kind of talk about the bigger picture stuff, because this is really what matters for digestion and gut health, regardless of if you have issues or not, or symptoms or not. You know, if you're male, female, whatever your goal is, like digestion starts basically with like mindful eating and our stress response. So this is kind of where we always need to start, you know, with a new client. So basically, to understand this, we need to look at our nervous system a little bit quickly. So basically, we have two states of our nervous system, okay? We'll always be in one of these two states, and it's our autonomic nervous system, which just means it's automatic. We don't decide if we're in our stress response, or we don't decide if we're in our relaxation response. Our body automatically adapts depending on the environment that we're in. So these two states, okay, are our sympathetic nervous system, or fight or flight, okay? A lot of people have heard of that, fight or flight. And this is basically designed so that when you deem that there is a stressful situation, okay, your body, without you having to do anything, starts up-regulating its stress response to deal with that stressor. And those adaptations are like increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, improved vision, improved hearing, increased blood glucose levels, increased cortisol. Your immune system actually even upregulates, so that if you get hurt in this fight or flight response, your immune system is already upregulated to deal with that quicker. So it's pretty crazy, right? It's pretty impressive. So what this kind of means from an evolutionary standpoint is we're going about our day, we're going about our life, and then if we end up in a fight or flight situation and we have to, you know, run for our lives or fight for our life, our body primes itself like that. So think about if you've ever maybe nearly had like a car crash or something, all of a sudden you're like a lot more alert, your heart starts beating faster, etc., etc. That is your body just switching into that sympathetic state of its nervous system, okay, which is known as fight or flight. Now, that is a really good thing, okay? And this is what people need to understand, is they think that high heart rate, high blood pressure, high stress hormone, which is cortisol, is bad. Now, if we didn't have that, we literally would have died off however many thousands of years ago. It's a stress response, which is super important to understand. The problem is when we stay there. So what our default settings should be is our parasympathetic nervous system, or rest and recover, or what's also sometimes called rest and digest. Okay, and that's key to understand because it's where digestion occurs, which is where this kind of links back in. So that is like where we should be the majority of the time, is like rest and recover. This is when we're resting, we're rebuilding, we're digesting nutrients, like we're improving our health, etc., etc. And we should only go into that fight or flight state of our nervous system occasionally when we need to deal with a fight or flight response. It shouldn't happen often. So the best way I've ever heard this described is from Luke Lerman, that said it should be like a sprint response. Okay, just a sprint, short period of time. Oh crap, there's a saber-toothed tiger. We need to run away, and then you're back out of it. Okay, so think about it this way for a second. Have you ever watched like an animal documentary? There's a cheetah chasing after a gazelle. The gazelle gets away, and 1 minute later, the gazelle's eating grass. Like, that's mad, right? If a cheetah was chasing us, 1 minute later, we wouldn't be back to eating. We'd be like, oh my God, we nearly died. So we have we have a really bad ability at shifting back into that rest and recover state of our nervous system, like any other animal does a much better job of it. Okay, and the difference also for us is we spend a lot more time in this fight or flight state. We live there. Like, we wake up to an alarm, which is a stressor. We're probably tired when we get up in the morning. You know, we're probably rushing around. We're eating maybe as we go. We're trying to get the kids ready. We're then stuck in traffic. We have an argument with our boss. You know, you get where I'm going with this, etc., etc. So this stress response is triggered like really frequently throughout the day. Okay, arguments, anxiety, depression, like whatever it might be. Okay, we've had a long day. We're relying on stimulants which upregulate our stress response. We go to the gym. We maybe smash ourselves up way too hard with like some crazy conditioning type workout. We finish training really late. We eat really late. Okay, we're still in this stress response state of our nervous system. We go to sleep, and this process kind of repeats itself. So the kind of point is that we kind of live in this stress response now most of the time, whereas we should only enter it occasionally. And that's a problem, because now that elevation in heart rate, that elevation in cortisol, that elevation in blood pressure, that elevation in blood glucose levels, instead of them being short term, which is key to keeping us alive, they become chronic, which means they just stay there, like they're always elevated. Okay, increased blood pressure, we all know what that means. You know, you end up with hypertension. Increased blood glucose levels that stay there, we now end up pre-diabetic and then type 2 diabetic. So the point kind of here you can see is that actually stress is responsible for a lot of our health problems. A lot of people think it's our eating bad food, but actually eating bad food doesn't increase your blood pressure. It doesn't increase your heart rate. I mean, not literally. So actually one of the biggest issues with our health in general, in particular our digestive system these days, is the fact that we just live in this stress response state of our nervous system. We're just living in fight or flight, and we're spending, oh, sorry, mosquito. We're spending way too much time there. So then that adaptation to dealing with that fight or flight situation becomes chronic, which just means it stays elevated, which now impairs digestion. You know, it leads to type 2 diabetes, leads to cardiovascular disease, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of really important. That's a bigger picture concept to understand when it comes to people's health. And I know it's easier said than done. And I know it's easy to say when you don't have kids and some other commitments, but you really, really do need to prioritize some time for you throughout the day to purposefully try and shift from this fight or flight state of your nervous system into the parasympathetic state of your nervous system, or rest and recover, rest and digest, in particular at meal times. So you see where I'm going with this now for digestion. So the reason this is so key for digestion is, again, let's say we're about to run for our life, okay? Or we've just had to run for our life, or we've just had to hunt some food or whatever. Okay, a stressful situation, fight or flight. We need all the available blood and energy to go to the arms and the legs, to run, to climb, to fight, do whatever it is. We don't want it directed to the digestive system for digestion, okay? So digestion can't optimally occur in our fight or flight response of the nervous system, okay? It needs to be in that rest and digest, hence why it's called rest and digest state of the nervous system. So what the body very cleverly does to kind of stop that happening, to stop you feeling hungry and wanting to eat when you're in that fight or flight state of the nervous system, is you won't produce as much saliva. So I don't know if you've ever, you know, been in a very stressful situation that you can remember. Even sometimes a workout, like you might find that you've got a bit of a dry mouth, you don't have as much saliva, because of course digestion starts in the brain by triggering the production of saliva and by triggering a hunger response. So when the brain is perceiving a stress response, we're in a stressful situation, and then the body is telling the brain our stress response is upregulated, heart rate's high, blood pressure's high, the brain then dampens down digestion, basically, okay, in the simplest way of explaining it. So we can't optimally digest food when we're in that stress response. So for a lot of people that are eating as they're physically on the go, they're eating and working at the same time, they're eating, you know, maybe right after they've had like an argument with their boss or something like that, that is really going to impair digestion via multiple mechanisms. And this is honestly, depending on the person, it's honestly usually the biggest thing we can do to improve someone's digestion is actually this umbrella term of mindful eating. It is normally more powerful than adding anything in or removing anything. Because if you're not producing saliva, and if you're not chewing the food, and if you're not increasing stomach acid production, then you've put a massive stress on your digestive system before we even got started, because that first part of digestion that occurs mechanically when chewing, and the second part that occurs, sorry, I've just got a Zoom notification for unlimited minutes, sorry. So the first and second part that occur via the chewing and the saliva, which then upregulate stomach acid production, if none of that's happening, then your stomach has a really hard time, because whole pieces of food are entering the stomach that should be broken down already by the mouth, by chewing and the digestive enzymes. So now the stomach is already at a disadvantage. So this is where we often get bloating, gas, acid reflux. Those symptoms are often just as simple as eating in a stress response state of your nervous system and not chewing properly. So that is always the first thing we need to address. So what does the practical application of that look like? This kind of umbrella term of mindful eating, it means a few things. Ideally, it means eating mindfully. So I'm not being preoccupied, you know, by trying to work at the same time or walking or doing anything like that. Okay, because that is going to require some of our mental energy and potentially be stressful. Okay, so that's kind of part one. Also, we probably won't chew our food as well if we're not thinking about it. So there's less chewing as well as less saliva production. Okay, so that's really important. That's just kind of part one of mindful eating. Ideally, part two is making sure we've done something to shift from that stress response to that relaxation response. So I know this sounds a bit silly and like it won't make a difference, but honestly, if you can take 3 to 5 minutes to like separate your environment from whatever it is that's stressing you out, whatever it is that you're thinking about, whatever work it is you've got to do, you know, instead of walking and eating at the same time, if you can actually sit down and create a separate kind of meal space, and eat mindfully and eat away from that distraction and spend a few minutes like just shifting that state of your nervous system. And that can be something as simple as, you know, just listening to a nice voice note from your friend or watching a funny video on YouTube. Like, it doesn't have to be some specific stress management technique, like actually doing meditation or breath work or anything like that. Like, it doesn't necessarily need to be anything formal, although that stuff can be awesome at really quickly and really effectively bringing your heart rate down and bringing your breath down and blood pressure down. So like using the Wim Hof method app for just some breathing exercises, or using the Headspace app for a few minutes of meditation, that stuff can be great before a meal. But honestly, sometimes I just like put my work away, I put my phone on do not disturb so I'm not getting anything coming in. And maybe I just catch up with a voice note from a friend, or, you know, read a nice message or something like that. And often that is enough for a couple of minutes to just just relax. And then you'll find you actually feel a bit hungrier. You'll start to produce some saliva. You eat mindfully, so you're actually chewing it. If you want to get a little bit specific and try this just 1 or 2 times, I don't think this is a long-term strategy. It would be a bit unhealthy and a bit obsessive, but I ideally get all my clients a few times to count their chews and try and chew a mouthful like 30 to 40 times. Yeah. Now, that is a lot of chewing compared to what you're often used to. So you really want to chew that mouthful until it's liquid. And I promise you, that will make such a massive difference for any digestive symptoms that you're having. You know, you wouldn't believe it. So chewing is kind of half of it, and then the next half is just the duration of eating your meal. So I actually get clients to put a stopwatch on and try and make that meal last 10 to 15 minutes, depending on what the meal is. You know, overnight oats are very different to a steak in terms of how much chewing, obviously. So 10 to 15 minutes. You'll be amazed at how quickly you're scoffing down a meal in literally 3 to 5 minutes and barely chewing it. So like, you know, do that the next time you have a meal, put a stopwatch on and count your chews, but don't try and aim for 10 to 15 minutes and 30 to 40 chews. Just do what you would do normally and see how far off you are from that, and let Johnny know, because honestly, the disconnect there is massive. And I promise you, you'll notice a difference, because you've just done most of the digestion with the saliva and mechanically from chewing. And what that does is it gives your stomach a chance to upregulate stomach acid production via the vagal nerve, which then means your stomach acid will do its work properly as well. So now by the time that food actually enters the large intestine, we've done what we should have done, whereas normally we haven't, basically. So that is always part one when it comes to kind of digestion, is that umbrella term of mindful eating. So shifting into that relaxation response, purposely doing something for a few minutes to get there. Like, don't just go straight into eating. Chewing 30 to 40 times, trying to make the meal last 10 to 15 minutes, do it mindfully, away from distractions, put your knife and fork down in between bites. If you're having something like a sandwich, put it down. Often if I'm having things like sandwiches or wraps or that type of thing, and if I'm dieting, if I'm on lower calories and I really need to feel fuller from the meal as well, I won't eat it like that. I'll actually like knife and fork, a wrap or a sandwich or something, just to force myself to chew more, force myself to make it last longer. And kind of on a quick side point of kind of from a weight loss standpoint, there's a couple of great studies which look at people's calorie intake when they eat mindfully versus not. And the one off the top of my head is there's about a 20% difference in the calories you consume versus like when you try and eat really slowly, because your stomach kind of has a chance to catch up and tell your brain that you're full, because that has a lag time. So if you're eating your meal in 3 minutes, there's no chance for that lag time to kind of catch up. So that's why you're finishing your meal and you're going, oh, I'm still hungry. And obviously that's a really bad thing when we're trying to be adherent to a calorie deficit. So actually eating a lot slower is super important for consuming less calories, because you might be able to leave some food on the plate. You realize you're not hungry anymore, and just feeling fuller after the meal as well. So satiety and then satiation, so fullness in between meals, will last longer as well, because we have a chance for that like lag time to kind of catch up, so to speak. So within reason, the longer you can make your meals last, the better. And personal trainers are often the worst for this. I used to use Johnny's Meal Prep Company when I was back in England. I'm in Thailand now, and I was doing 50 PT sessions a week. So whenever one of them would message me going, hey, I'm running 7 minutes late, I would go, great, I'm getting out a heat and lean salmon risotto, and I'm eating that in 5 minutes. And it's so hypocritical. So I understand that it is much easier said than done. So for me, because I can't tell you like how you practically apply that to your life, but for me, I had to start doing no more than 3 to 4 clients back to back, and then just shifting them by like 10 to 15 minutes like each way, to give myself like these 20-25 minute gaps, so that I could actually finish a client, have a few minutes to kind of relax. Because when you're going like, yes, Johnny, good man, give me 10 more seconds, like that gets you a bit stressed, that gets you a bit amped up, So you need these like, few minutes to relax, unwind, and then actually eat that meal properly, which takes, 10 to 15 minutes. So that's just the practical application of how I did it. I had to just change my one-on-one PT diary a little bit. And I know that can be easier said than done, but honestly, if you take anything from this call, whatever you want to call it, that is honestly the biggest thing that's going to make the most difference. Everyone wants to talk about sauerkraut and kombucha, and it's just like, honestly, they're probably not going to make a difference at all. But mindful eating will make a difference 100% to anyone and everyone. The severity of how much it makes a difference will, of course, depend on how far removed you are from that right now, and potentially what exact problems you have. But I can assure you it will make a massive, massive difference. And the last couple of things just on that, in terms of some specific considerations, are waiting when you finish training. Training pushes you hard into that fight or flight state of your nervous system. So if you were to put a heart rate monitor on when you finish training, or keep it on if you train with one, you might notice that it actually takes you like 45 plus minutes to actually get your heart rate all the way back down to what is resting for you, maybe 40s, 50s, low 60s, whatever it might be. That might take 45 or even 60 minutes, which means we probably don't want to be eating within 45 to 60 minutes of finishing a workout, because, well, we definitely don't want to be, because we need to let the body come out of that stress response state and get back into rest and recover. So actually purposefully trying to speed that up by doing some breath work, by doing some meditation, by doing some stretching, so some good breathing and some stretching at the same time, and trying to get your body out of that stress response and back into that parasympathetic state of the nervous system, that rest and recover state. That's actually super important when you finish training, especially if you're someone that needs to eat quickly after training, because maybe you're going to work, or you're going to bed if you're training in the evening, because otherwise we end up with this not ideal situation where you're cramming a meal in after training, where you're really not going to be able to digest it properly. So you'll miss out on a lot of the benefits, a lot of the nutrients. It will cause more stress to the body trying to break it down, which means you'll have some digestive symptoms and issues as a result of it. So yeah, make sure you're waiting a little bit when you finish training. If you can't, for time reasons, then consider using a liquid post-workout meal. So, a protein shake, and if you have in your macros and you want, of course, you can blend up, some veg or some berries, or, whatever. Johnny handles your nutrition and he knows what he's doing there, but you get the point. So that's really important post-workout. And then the next window that is kind of important is sleep. A lot of people eat way too close to bed. We ideally want at least 2 hours, but depending on the meal, it can even take longer than 2 hours to fully digest the meal. And there is an opposite correlation between digestive system activity and melatonin production. So a lot of the time people have poor sleep quality, and they're also eating way too close to going to sleep. So trying to bring that window back, so there's a gap between finishing your meal and going to sleep in terms of this mindful eating, stress response, etc., is also super important. So a combination of like just actioning and implementing this whole mindful eating umbrella kind of term and tips, and trying to change, you know, not eating too close to the workout and not eating too close to going to sleep. Honestly, those there really are 50 to 80%, depending on the person, of improving your digestive system and the issues that you're having. So yeah, any questions kind of on that, Johnny, or from anyone kind of on that part before we move on?
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in and say the same. Like, those that are watching live now, like, what's your biggest takeaway from what Leo just said there? And then if you're watching on catch up, just comment below and we can get back to the comments if needed. But even for me personally on that, while you were talking, even on like, so when I'm dieting, like in the summer, I would push my training back. Yeah, summer training. So I'd push my training back to say like 5 o'clock in the evening. I'd spend a couple of hours in the gym, 7 o'clock, and then I probably wouldn't end up eating at all because of exactly what you're saying. Like, I don't actually feel hungry straight after training, and I can then just, the evening just comes in, then it's too close to dinner, and I don't actually allow myself to eat almost. So it's kind of like a nice little calorie restriction as well. But actually something I don't do myself is leave a 2-hour window before eating. Sometimes I'll have my overnight oats pre-bed within, I don't know, sometimes it's like an hour, but as you're saying, it needs to stretch out that little bit further to enable yourself to be fully rested, right?
Yeah, perfect, mate. Sorry, I was just reading
go
comment from Freddie, which is great. So yeah, man, what you've just said there is spot on. Like for me, you know, again, going back to just because the practical application of this will always be very different for everyone. For me, you know, like you, Johnny, when we're doing one-on-one PTs, I finish at 9 p.m. and then you're up at 5 a.m. So like, how can you fit a meal in after that? You can't. So for me, dinner was 3:30 or 4:30 p.m. and then I'd have clients from 4 or 5 p.m. again in the evening. So this is where we kind of, I guess, need to challenge the status quo, I guess, in terms of like meal timing and food choices at certain times, etc. Because, you know, yeah, that's technically not dinner time, but what are my options? My options are I have it then, or I get home at probably about 9:30, which means I'm probably not eating until, you know, after 9:30. And if I'm eating properly, how I'm saying we should eat, then that's probably the best part of 10 o'clock. You know, and now that's a real problem, because if we reverse engineer sleep for a second, the research is very, very clear on being asleep before 11 p.m. versus after. And not that anything magically happens at 11:01, but if you want to delve into that, there's some fantastic research coming out of the University of Stanford by Andrew Huberman, PhD. And it makes a massive difference because, of course, humans are designed to wake up and go to sleep with the sun. Like, there wasn't electricity 150 years ago. We have a built-in internal clock called our circadian rhythm. So we really ideally need to be asleep by like 11, absolute latest. And often people will train late. They'll be all wired up, cortisol's high, adrenaline's high. They're in this fight or flight state of their nervous system from the training session. They then go home, they shower, they eat, and it's maybe quite a large meal because it's the evening and it's post-workout, and all of a sudden a combination of eating and the stress from their training really pushes the time that they're going to sleep quite late. They might struggle to then fall asleep, and then they probably don't get into good quality deep sleep as quick as they could, because we still have all of this stuff happening from digesting the meal and the stress of training, which then really affects sleep quality. And, you know, not to go off on a tangent about sleep, but sleep is just absolutely everything. So these are things that we do need to consider. If you can leave 2 hours between a meal and you going to sleep, I can, you know, guarantee you'll notice a difference. And you might not notice it in terms of falling asleep, but you will get better quality sleep for sure. Like, the research is very, very clear on that. And of course, there's always outliers, and of course, like, people that are exceptions to the rule. But yeah, like, I've never had a client that's not got better quality sleep when we've tried to bring that last meal earlier. Or sometimes what we've had to do, which is what I was about to say for myself and forgot to finish. So what I had to do was eat that meal in the afternoon, finish a client at 9, and then I'd have a protein shake like waiting for me when I finish my last client at the gym, and I'd kind of drink that as I'm finishing up. Not even when I get home, just to kind of try and have it as early as possible. The fact it's liquid does make a massive difference. A lot of that digestion has already occurred. And, you know, I'd have a protein shake and I'd stick some other bits in there. It wasn't just protein. So it is a meal in terms of calories and micronutrients, etc. And that for me just meant that I could be asleep by 10:15, whereas otherwise that was just never going to be possible. And if I wasn't asleep by 10:15, you know, I'm not performing very well the next day for a 6 a.m. client. So, you know, some of this stuff, often people are, oh, well, that's, you know, a bit rubbish, doesn't work with cooking for the kids or my other half. Like, I hear you, I get that. It needs to be practical. It needs to work for whatever situation you are in, of course. You know, there's kind of what's optimal might be over here, what's practical is over here. So, you know, it might not be a case of chasing perfection, but sometimes if we can just try and shift a little bit from where you're currently at towards what would be ideal, often that's enough to make a difference as well. So if some of this stuff isn't sounding particularly, you know, actionable for you, just do the best you can with it. You know, sometimes for clients, it's as simple as changing food choices at dinner and making dinner a bit smaller. So, you know, for example, there's nothing wrong with steak and brown rice, nothing at all, of course not. They're both quite hard to digest. So if you were to have like a beef mince and maybe a white potato or even a sweet potato, they're probably for most people going to be much easier to chew and digest than like a steak and like a brown rice. So if we can also then maybe make the portion a little bit smaller, maybe have slightly less fibrous vegetables, like maybe bring those down even a little bit in that meal. But yes, we want our veggies, we want our micronutrients for sure, but maybe if we can shift those elsewhere in the day, so we're not having a large amount of like broccoli, sprouts, cabbage, parsnips, then now the amount of volume and the amount of fiber we're having is less in that evening meal, as well as maybe changing food choices to be easier digesting. And sometimes that can be enough. If you can't change the time that you're having the last meal, trying to make it 10 to 20% smaller and making some kind of swaps to food choices. So spinach instead of broccoli, for example, beef mince instead of a steak, etc., might be enough to make it a lot easier on your digestive system, which just, you know, might help in terms of, yeah, falling asleep easier and getting better sleep quality.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. Love that. Actionable tips.
Perfect. So yeah, Freddie said something he probably realizes now is that you do eat very quickly. Yeah, I think a lot of this stems from childhood. Like the quicker you eat, the quicker you get dessert, or the quicker you eat, the quicker you get to go back out and play with your friends, right? So we kind of have these habits installed from childhood that you need to finish everything on your plate, which, you know, just isn't always the case. And often eating quicker is better because eating isn't often something we want to do as a child, and it's a distraction from playing or doing whatever. So yeah, sometimes it's just like a real subconscious kind of like default setting, so to speak. So making a conscious effort with the use of like counting our chews and using a timer just on your phone, just next to you, you know, can be really beneficial in terms of, yeah, slowing that down and bringing some awareness to it. And then once you've done that a few times, you don't need to keep doing it. You know, you've changed that default habit now. So yeah, I hope that part helps there, everyone.
Yeah, nice. I think if we go into the questions, because I know there's a question about fiber, and sort of it would be quite a nice tangent to, as you were talking about, sort of fibrous foods later at night and all that kind of stuff. I don't know where it is.
Yeah, I've got it here as well. So yeah.
Oh, is it true that if your body is not used to consuming a lot of fiber, do you have to introduce it slowly so as to not bloat you?
Yeah. So the short answer to that would be yes. That is definitely correct. So let's take two people, for example, just quickly. If one of them, you know, ups their fiber by, I don't know, whatever, like 5 grams extra in a meal, and they take 20 minutes to eat that meal, the person next to them doesn't up their fiber at all, but scoffs that meal in 3 minutes. Person A, the first person, would probably still experience less bloating than person B. So kind of what we need to understand with anything in health, but in particular digestion, is there's kind of a lot of context and a lot of variables. So the amount of fiber matters, but as we've just kind of touched on, you know, the saliva and the chewing and the stomach acid upregulation also matters. And that's going to, you know, make a big difference to how, you know, bloated you do or don't get by upping any amount of food, but in particular fiber. But yes, definitely. One problem I'll often have with clients, I'm sure you've experienced it as well, Johnny, is they've gone from like 0 vegetables because they don't like them, and often low carb, because often, a lot of people come to us eating way too few carbs sometimes. So, we add in some vegetables and we add in some maybe some starchy carbs. And sometimes that can be too much of a jump all at once, and they do experience some bloating. So trying to taper that up over a couple of weeks, can be important. It can be an important strategy for sure. So, this is where, like, again, tracking and knowing the numbers can be really important. So if you're roughly tracking and you're at 10 grams of fiber, 15 grams of fiber per day, sure, we definitely don't want to jump to 25, 30. So gradually taking a week to up it by about 5 grams and then up it a little bit more is a good strategy for sure. But again, it doesn't really matter how much fiber we're having from a bloating standpoint if we're not doing anything that we just kind of talked about when it comes to mindful eating and actually digesting the food, in this case, the fiber in the first place. Also with fiber, just quickly, fiber choice often does matter for people. So a lot of times people have a hard time digesting FODMAPs, which basically stands for a few different types of fiber. There's quite a long list of FODMAPs, so I'm not going to reel them off now. But basically, if that's you, so for example, like bananas, avocado, etc., if that's you, then what we sometimes often need to do is go low FODMAP for a small amount of time, maybe 3 to 4 weeks, sometimes even just 2 weeks makes a massive difference. And then try to reintroduce FODMAPs slowly in terms of the choices and the amount of fiber as well. And the reason being is that FODMAPs for people often ferment quite badly and can cause a lot of bloating and gas. And in certain people that have an underlying issue, such as maybe SIBO, a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, Candida, which is a yeast infection, and etc. And these are fairly common these days. Maybe one in 10 people you'll often find has at least one of these problems, which means, for every 30 clients we work with, at least one, maybe even 3 to 4, will probably have SIBO, H. pylori, Candida as an actual real issue, like a real underlying, problem, overgrowth of either yeast or bacteria, or an infection. And then they can have a real hard time with FODMAPs in particular. So IBS is a real umbrella term, irritable bowel syndrome. Syndrome just means a collection of symptoms. Just like PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome, just means a collection of symptoms. It's not one diagnosis. It's just like you've got a problem, basically. So often in people that have IBS, one thing they'll have a problem with is FODMAPs, because the root cause of their IBS often might be a bacterial or a yeast infection or overgrowth, which then means FODMAPs they can have a hard time with. So sometimes it's the amount of fiber, sometimes it's the mindful eating, sometimes it's jumping up in fiber too quickly, and sometimes it's the type of fiber. So I would recommend, if that kind of sounds right for anyone, if they've been diagnosed with IBS or they have problems with bloating and gas, definitely look at the quite long list of foods that are under the umbrella term of FODMAPs and consider going low FODMAP for a while. And the best resource on this, it does cost a one-off £8, but it's brilliant, is there's an app from the Monash University, which is like the leading university for research on FODMAPs. They have a great app, so it's like a searchable database, and every food, and someone's just commented, Monash University app, great resource for support FODMAPs. Yeah, I agree. So yeah, if anyone needs it in writing, someone's put it in the comments, so thank you for that, whoever that is. So one-off £8, but it's brilliant because a lot of the time, for example, beetroot's fine, but pickled beetroot often isn't. And sometimes there's a grey area in between. So this app is brilliant because it kind of gives you every variation of the food, and it will give you a green or a red or an orange, which will say like sometimes some people and or in a small amount are okay with this food. So low FODMAP is an approach that I often need to take with clients for at least the first 2 to 4 weeks. Alongside like a standard elimination diet of removing wheat, gluten, and sometimes dairy as well, alongside low FODMAP. And then depending on the exact symptoms and issues that we're experiencing and what ones go or don't go, which is why it's kind of really important to like keep this trigger diary and keep this symptoms diary and keep a food diary. we then obviously start to reintroduce. So just on that quickly, for anyone thinking, okay, great, I'm willing to put in a little bit of work of trying to keep a food diary and trying to keep a symptoms or a trigger diary. A couple of things here which are super important is it might take up to 8 hours for a meal to be fully digested. Now, in 8 hours, you might have had 2 meals. And this is a real issue for people, is they always think what is the last meal they had. And this can sometimes be why it's difficult for people to like put the puzzle together, so to speak, is they're always looking at the last meal. But please, if you're having any issues or symptoms that flare up, okay, try and look at an 8-hour window, okay, and that's super important. Part 2 on this is digestive issues don't just have digestive symptoms, okay? Some digestive issues can present symptoms, skin issues, eczema, psoriasis. They often always stem from the gut, or at least have a gut component. If not, it's the complete root cause. Neurological conditions, anxiety, depression, headaches, migraines usually have part of the root cause from the gut, if not all of the root cause. Itchy skin, you know, hair, nails, someone said in here something about hair. All of these can stem from the gut. So when we're kind of trying to put this puzzle together of like healing and fixing your health, we need to keep the food diary, and then we need to look at a full body trigger and symptoms. So neurological, skin, you know, hormonal, like cravings, energy crashes, you know, etc., etc. So like on my health questionnaire that I use with new clients, there's about, some of the questions are repeated under different subsections, but there's about 50 or 60 questions, which is quite a lot. And the point there, I don't want to overwhelm any of you, but the point there is sometimes a lot of things that we don't perceive to be connected often do stem back to our digestive system. So when we're kind of trying to, put our detective hat on and figure this stuff out, try and look back as far as 6 to 8 hours when you have a flare up, and don't just look for digestive flare ups such as bloating, gas, acid reflux, constipation, etc. Also look at other symptoms and issues that you might be having elsewhere, full body. So yeah, I hope that helps some of you in terms of the tracking. And just last on that as well, is sometimes small ingredients that you wouldn't perceive to be problematic often can be. So one group of foods known as nightshades, which is a collective group of like plants and spices, which kind of have their like own built-in defense mechanism, because they obviously can't run away. They can actually cause a lot of digestive issues for people to try and stop you eating them. So sometimes it could be as simple as like a single spice that you might not in your mind really be thinking is like a big main ingredient. So you might not even be tracking it in your food diary, but that might be the problem for you. And I know this is annoying because it gets kind of quite nitty gritty and specific, but you know, if we're committed to finding the root cause for you, then yeah, we kind of need to be considering that. So, you know, when it comes to plants, like just quickly to go off on a quick tangent, yeah, always remember that plants can't run away. They don't have a built-in that isn't their built-in defense mechanism is often producing anti-nutrients or producing chemicals to stop you eating them. So there is more non-edible plants, poisonous mushrooms, poisonous berries, etc., than there is edible ones. So a lot of the time, these plants and berries, etc., that we do eat have been, you know, genetically modified over a long period of time, so that isn't really a problem. But often in a lot of them, it is still there a little bit. And they are known as nightshades. So that is definitely one area to look into. I often have clients that struggle with nightshades, and then they have to go on like an AIP diet, so an autoimmune paleo style diet, which is kind of like a cross between paleo, carnivore, and keto in terms of your food choices. But it basically removes FODMAPs, legumes, so beans and lentils and chickpeas, and nightshades. So basically removes most plant type foods. Because often they are causing an inflammatory and an immune system response. And that doesn't mean you can't avoid those forever, but often whilst we bring down that inflammation, whilst we heal the intestinal lining, whilst we let our immune system like recover and dampen down and relax, instead of having to be upregulated and fighting these foods that we're consuming, sometimes we have to remove them temporarily. So yeah, the areas to look into for sure, if you're struggling with any of these kind of symptoms and issues, are definitely FODMAPs, legumes, nightshades, and oxalates. So yeah, it could be one of those, it could even be all of them. but there's no reason normally that we can't end up reintroducing them. Like, unless you actually have a food allergy to that food, 9 times out of 10, we can reintroduce most of, if not all of those foods back in eventually. Just sometimes we need to let the intestinal lining heal, our immune system recover, the inflammation go down, and then we can start to add those foods back in. So if I just do a quick screen share to show anyone that is going to watch the video live, like what that looks like, because I just think that this graph can be quite beneficial. So just let me know if you can see my screen here, Johnny.
Yeah, all good.
Perfect. So this here, credit to Muscle Nerds for this. So this is like our intestinal lining, our small intestines. Now, this is a microscopic level. So this is kind of the problem with this. And again, going back to that like Western medicine and traditional medicine, is if you were to have a camera put up there to look at this, you wouldn't see this. So leaky gut is a term that wasn't accepted as true in the medical community for a very long period of time. Whereas now it is, at least by most doctors. So the technical term for this is intestinal permeability. So basically here you can see we have tight junctions. This is how they should be. And then we have gaps, so leaky and inflamed, hence the name leaky gut. Now, what this means is that whole pieces of food can enter our bloodstream, bacteria, viruses, pathogens, etc., etc. Now, because the body doesn't recognize them, they shouldn't be entering the bloodstream. We now have this upregulation in immune response to basically fight them because they're technically foreign invaders. Okay, so let me know if that concept makes sense. Why will it not let me make this page bigger? How do I zoom in just quickly? So what the body then basically does, we can see here the knock-on effects that it has. It affects micronutrient absorption. So a lot of the time people will be like, I'm getting in enough fruits and veggies. Like, why do I have symptoms of being low in magnesium, low in B vitamins, like fatigue, like period pain, period problems? Why am I having all these symptoms of being micronutrient deficient when I'm getting enough micronutrients in? Well, often we have an issue with stomach acid and not eating properly, which we've covered. And often we don't have time to properly break them down in the intestines, okay? Autoimmunity, so an autoimmune response. So for example, ending up with Hashimoto's. So we're having an immune response where our body is attacking itself because it doesn't recognize these things that are entering the bloodstream because they shouldn't be entering the bloodstream. We develop food intolerances. These foods can cross the blood-brain barrier, which is how they can have neurological problems such as anxiety, depression, mood swings, headaches, and they cause full body inflammation. So obviously you can see here, this is very, very problematic. So fixing this is super important. So this sometimes can be removing whatever it is for you that might be causing this inflammation and damage to the intestinal lining, which sometimes can be specific food groups, including plants, such as FODMAPs, legumes, oxalates, nightshades, or it can be medications. It can be painkillers, it can be birth control, it can be antacids, it can be too many medications, and of course it can be excessive processed food, processed sugar, alcohol as well. So this is a really common situation, this like leaky gut, and it isn't you have it or you don't. It's kind of like a continuum. It's like a sliding spectrum. So a lot of people will have this, and the symptoms that we'd be looking for here are kind of what we just ran through here. So are you having issues with your immune system? Like, are you always run down, having low energy, fatigue, always battling colds and flus, etc.? Do you take a long time to recover? Do your cuts and bruises take a long time to heal? This is an issue of your immune system. Do you have symptoms and specific intolerances to specific foods? Have you developed food intolerances? Are you having neurological issues? Do you have full body inflammation? Do you have signs of being deficient in micronutrients, even though you consume enough micronutrients? So I would say as many as 80% of the new clients that I work with kind of have some degree of leaky gut going on. Now, of course, that's like a biased sample size in the sense that generally speaking, unhealthy people are contacting me for coaching. So I'm not saying 80% of people have leaky gut, but 80% of people, I would say anecdotally, my new clients have this. So what we need to do here is find out what the specific triggers are, and sometimes that can be all of them. So sometimes we have to go full elimination diet, autoimmune paleo for at least 3 to 4 weeks before reintroducing. Or if we've got an idea what the specific triggers are, sometimes we can just try removing just then. We definitely need to look at trying to minimize medication, processed foods, alcohol, sugar, etc., to just support these junctions becoming less inflamed and healing. And a couple of great supplements that can be really beneficial here is a collagen protein powder, or you can just use bone broth, because those amino acids are used for the rebuilding of the intestinal lining. So things like our gelatin, arginine, glutamine, etc. And then L-glutamine itself as a supplement can be fantastic for this, and zinc carnosine. So they're the 3 supplements that I'd typically be looking to add in. I don't want to overplay the importance of those. If we're not removing any of the stuff that's causing this issue in the first place, those 3 supplements aren't going to magically fix it. But once we've removed those and we've kind of found our consistency with that, so, you know, a few days or 1 or even 2 weeks later, I would then typically look to add those supplements in for, you know, 8 to 12 weeks to help fix and heal this intestinal lining. And then making sure we're keeping a diary of the specific relevance to these triggers along the bottom here to you, and obviously seeing that improving, and then looking to reintroduce foods one at a time, basically. And if any of you want to do an actual blood test to like get some actual numbers on this, a really great blood test you can do is a full blood count or a complete blood count, so FBC or CBC, and that basically, long story short, will test your immune system response amongst other things. So when that is chronic, so when it's like really, really low, it's like really suppressed, like mine was a few months ago as a result of antibiotics and painkillers, mine was in the floor, like it was super low. So it might be chronic, it might be really low, or it might actually be acute. It might be really, really high. So if this stuff has been happening to you, but it hasn't been happening for too long, and your immune system is upregulated and still fighting it, often you might see that it's really, really high. And then eventually, if you were not to address it, it would crash into the floor. Like me, I didn't address it too well earlier this year, quickly enough. So that can be a really good blood test if you want to actually see some solid numbers and then retest and see the improvements. And to be honest, that's going to be more accurate and will tell you more than a food intolerance test anyway, because long story short, on those, there can be a lot of false positives. And also, why are we developing the food intolerances in the first place? It's because of this. We shouldn't be developing a response, an intolerance to a specific food, because that food should be completely broken down before it enters the bloodstream. So this immune response here, the upregulation in IgA, in beta cells, in T cells, in histamine, that shouldn't be happening in response to a specific food, because it should be fully broken down before it enters the bloodstream. So all really a food intolerance test does anyway is tell you that you have leaky gut and you need to heal it and stop eating those foods temporarily, so you can stop getting the immune response to it, and then you can reintroduce them. Now, a food allergy is different. That is different, okay? But a food intolerance, that's kind of what we need to do. So yeah, that's kind of like really part 2 of where I go to is mindful eating is always number 1. And then I'd say with 80% of my clients, again, it's this. So, you know, people are here talking about fiber, talking about hair loss. Yes, it can be. So to answer that one quickly, there are 6 different types of hair loss. Find out which type of hair loss you have based on the exact symptoms and issues that you're having. Then you'll be able to find out what your root cause is more easily based on the exact actual type of hair loss that you have. There's 6 different ones. But all of this stuff, all of these questions, you know, getting in enough iron, we've kind of answered that already. You know, mood swings and emotions, we've kind of answered that already, all indirectly via, you know, you look at the ongoing issues that food intolerances have, that inflammation have, that not absorbing enough micronutrients have, that an upregulated immune response have. That is the knock-on effect of issues with your hair, issues with your hormones, issues with your emotions, issues with absorbing iron, etc., etc. It all stems from this here. So whilst people often sometimes have a specific problem as well, like Candida, like H. pylori, like SIBO, you might have those things. You need a stool test to find that out. Then you need to work with a specialist. That's maybe like the 1 in 10. That's the 10% of the time. The 80% of the time, it's that over time, this inflamed, damaged intestinal wall has happened, and subsequently the cascade, the knock-on effect is everything we've just spoke about, and we just need to spend 8 to 12 weeks healing that, and then you're good. You're usually good. You can usually reintroduce all of those foods. Of course, if you go back to maybe abusing the amount of foods, if you go back to abusing the amount of alcohol, painkillers, prescription drugs, processed foods, etc., sure, this might probably happen again. But I've never had a client that we haven't fixed. And I always say it like that because I don't ever want to make out that a client's broken. You're never broken. But for the sake of giving it a word, I've never fixed a client's digestive issues, and then they've never come back. You know, as long as the client stays 80% consistent, they never come back, because we fixed that underlying problem. And the amount of time it takes you to develop this, the amount of bad habits, the amount of bad lifestyle it takes over time to cause this problem, we're talking about, you know, months into years, which means, you know, once you've kind of had coaching for 3, 6, 9 months, you're probably never going to deviate back to that old you, if that makes sense, which means the majority of these digestive problems don't ever really come back. So you've got to put the work in for like those 8 to 12 weeks. We have to figure out what food groups we need to remove, maybe all of them. We need to be consistent with keeping them out. We need to maybe add in those free supplements. Again, they were like the collagen or bone broth, and the L-glutamine and the zinc carnosine. We need to focus on getting in plenty of micronutrients from whatever food sources you can have. So that often leaves you with some plants, with berries, with organ meat, which is super important. Bone broth is great. We need to be replenishing that and repairing the intestinal lining. Then we need to focus on the reintroduction phase in 8 to 12 weeks time. And that takes time, because we can only ideally do it one at a time. We then wait a couple of days, make sure we have had no issues, then we can reintroduce something else. So that takes a little bit of time. You know, this might be a 6-month journey, you know, so to speak, from start to finish. And so it takes a bit of work. It can take a bit of time, but once you've done it, you know, you've done it. And when you've kind of switched the narrative and switched the mindset, instead of, oh, there's a long list of things I need to remove, and you switch the mindset to, there's a long list of things that I'm allowed to have still, and you focus on that, and you focus on the benefits it will give you, the improvements in your energy levels that you will get, the improvements in whatever symptom it is you want to get rid of, then we kind of shift that mindset around the work that the process takes, which is super important, from the negatives and the restriction to the positives, the benefits and the inclusions. And now we hopefully have a positive process, which is, you know, is going to fix, you know, yeah, it's most probably going to fix your problems. So, yeah, any questions on that, mate?
No, I think you've, as you were talking, I was like, holy shit, he's answered all the questions as we're going. It's like you've absorbed them and just answered them in one go, which is amazing. I think the only one that would possibly be outstanding is the top one, which is, do fermented and pickled foods affect gut health? And then is it true that they can functionally lower the GI of other foods when paired together, or is that wives' tale myth? What?
Yeah, let's delve into that quickly. So a lot of people, again, will talk about specific food inclusions, but hopefully what we've done a good job of here is bringing awareness to the bigger picture. You know, it's the same thing, people stressing about meal timing if their goal is fat loss, you know, or their training split if their goal is muscle gain. We're kind of missing the forest for the trees for the most part. Did I get that saying the right way around? I'm not even sure, but hopefully everyone knows what I mean. So yeah, like there's so many other things that are going to be beneficial for gut health before we worry, you know, about kind of like pickled foods, fermented foods, etc. Generally speaking, yes, that fermentation process can bring some benefits to your gut flora and digestive enzymes and the diversity of, and that's a good thing. But if you look at the disconnect between getting in live probiotics from food and the amount sometimes from supplements. Like sometimes when a probiotic supplement's needed, like post antibiotic course, or if we've had any digestive issues, you will never be able to recreate the amount of live probiotics from food that you can in a supplement. So it's kind of like a great strategy from a preventative measure to focus on including them daily. But in terms of like a healing measure, it's one of those where actually we're often not going to be able to get, we won't be able to get enough in from food, and sometimes a supplement is needed. The caveat on this as well, just quickly, is if you have any issues with histamine or candida or SIBO, so we have an issue with a histamine response or a bacterial overgrowth or candida, actually fermented foods can be bad. They can be worse for that, and they'll actually basically use them to ferment more. And so if you have any symptoms of candida, of SIBO, then you actually want to avoid fermented foods. And actually, for the most part, fermented foods are avoided on the elimination diet and or like the autoimmune paleo diet. So often at the start, they need to be avoided because, yeah, potentially that fermentation is actually a bad thing. So it depends basically on the health and state of your gut as to whether it's a good or a bad thing. So again, you kind of just have to go through that process of elimination and kind of figure out where your gut's at in terms of adding them in. In terms of the second part of the question, yes. So the glycemic index is not really a great measure of anything. The reason being is the glycemic index is tested based on only eating a single food. So when would you ever eat just white potato or just white rice? You probably wouldn't ever do it. So the glycemic index is instantly altered / irrelevant because we would ideally always want like a quote unquote balanced meal, which subsequently affects gastric emptying time through the stomach and affects transit time through the intestines and into the bloodstream or the colon where it's past the stools as well. So glycemic index is instantly altered when we're eating foods as part of a whole meal, in particular fiber and fats and protein, which typically will take longer to digest than carbs, which don't contain fiber. So yeah, the glycemic index isn't really a massively relevant measure or consideration of anything really. I mean, watermelon has a GI index of 92. So like, are you going to avoid watermelon? Like, no, of course not. It's actually mostly water. So like that's just one specific example I always remember of why the glycemic index isn't really that relevant. You know, watermelon's technically bad on the glycemic index. So yeah, I hope that answers the second part of the question. So yeah, for example, they've said like, you know, when paired with rice, you're never going to have just rice, you know, because by default, you've obviously got a micronutrient target and a protein target to hit for the day, which subsequently means you'll be having fruits and or veggies and or, you know, other micronutrient sources and protein sources at every meal. So yeah, the other one, which I didn't really touch on, is just in relationship to the menstrual cycle. Now, I hope you don't mind a little bit of a plug here because it is a completely free masterclass, because the menstrual cycle is complex and there is no normal menstrual cycle. A lot of females won't even ovulate. So for those of you listening that are female, I don't know if you know this or not, a lot of females don't, but you can have a period without ovulating. It's called an anovulatory cycle. So just because you're having a period does not mean ovulation occurred. No ovulation equals no surge in progesterone, and that equals problems, basically. So we might have quote unquote estrogen dominance because estrogen's high in relation to low, because progesterone might be low because of micronutrients, stress, not enough calories, not enough fats, or maybe even ovulation didn't occur in the first place. Or we can have this problem with estrogen dominance because we're not getting rid of estrogen properly. And now this can be an issue with the liver, detoxifying it, and or stools, so not excreting it properly by pooing it out, basically. So any issues with the menstrual cycle, including bloating, can be a little bit complex, and we kind of need to go through this flow chart of, are you on birth control? Do you even have a cycle? Okay, and then if you have a cycle and you're not on birth control, because a period on birth control is not a real period because ovulation didn't occur. So let's say you're not on birth control. Are you even ovulating? If you don't know, we need to test that ideally. You can test that by measuring your body temperature first thing every morning, and ideally using ovulation strips that you urinate on when ovulation in theory should be occurring. Or you can obviously have your bloods tested in your luteal phase, and progesterone should be high. So, then we've got this, we're kind of moving through this flow chart. Is ovulation even occurring? If it is or if it isn't, we also then need to look at, is estrogen too high? And that can be a problem with the liver and or stools. So now we kind of have some questions around transit time, around constipation. We have some issues with symptoms of the liver. Symptoms of poor liver health include inability to tolerate alcohol, inability to tolerate chemicals, inability to break down fats, energy issues because you might not be able to methylate B vitamins. So we kind of ideally need a lot more context and a lot more questions answered to figure out any menstrual cycle specific issues. I mean, same as we need to figure out digestive system specific issues. We need more context and we need more information, unfortunately. So yeah, if this person would like to message me, and if you're okay with it, Johnny, I have done it's free. I've done a 45-minute odd video on issues with the menstrual cycle, which is just a screen record video and some slides, basically, so that there's some slides as a background to help. And it's completely free. I've just put it together to give to my clients to save myself repeating myself, basically. And I'm happy. It's just in Loom. I can just ping a link to that. So if you would like to try and figure out more any of the menstrual cycle issues that you're having, then yeah, we ideally need to know more context around your cycle, if you're ovulating, etc., etc. So I'll happily ping you that link if that's okay with you, mate. So hopefully that half answers that one. Yes, hair loss can be related to the gut. There can be 6 types of hair loss, so find out what type of hair loss you've got. Daily habits, mindful eating, and more mindful eating. There's really no supplements that are going to offset mindful eating and not consuming too much alcohol, medications, etc. So there's really not one blanket supplement that I have clients take. As I said, probably 80% of them have some degree of leaky gut, which means for 8 to 12 weeks, I'll typically use zinc carnosine, a collagen protein powder, and L-glutamine. Often clients will have low stomach acid as well. This can be affected by medications, by antacids, and being on less than 1,500 calories really affects stomach acid production because it's just not active. There's no activity happening when we're on low calories. So a lot of females in particular will have impaired stomach acid production. And I would say that 50 to 60% of new clients I work with have issues with low stomach acid. And symptoms of this can be acid reflux, bloating, inability to digest foods, etc., etc. So one supplement I'll often have around half of my clients take for maybe 4 to 6 weeks is hydrochloric acid, so stomach acid and ox bile. You can get that combined into an all-in-one supplement from Fawn. Fawn supplements do an ox bile and hydrochloric acid combination, which is awesome. Or you can just consume hydrochloric acid via apple cider vinegar. So just diluting some apple cider vinegar and drinking that with a meal, 1 tablespoon diluted in water. Just be careful on your teeth. But yeah, the ox bile can be really good as well, because often people that have liver issues, which is probably around half of the new clients I work with, that liver's being stressed from chemicals, from alcohol, from processed foods, have a little bit of fatty liver, they struggle to break down fats. So I'd say maybe 50% of the clients I work with, I get them to take a hydrochloric acid and ox bile supplement as well for maybe just 4 to 6 weeks whilst we fix these root causes so that they can properly digest foods. Because if you've got low stomach acid, we then have a massive problem absorbing nutrients, in particular iron. So a massive issue if we have symptoms of low iron, and a lot of people that are anemic, they go in, they have their iron IVs, and then however many weeks later, they feel crap again and their iron has crashed again. They go back to the doctor, they just give them another IV. We need to address why you've got low iron. And the biggest root cause of that is typically low stomach acid. So yeah, to kind of answer the supplement question, mindful eating and more mindful eating, and then addressing leaky gut, which is probably relevant for 80% of my clients, addressing low stomach acid, which is probably relevant for 50 to 60%, and addressing the liver, which is relevant to probably 50 to 60%, which is then that oxbar and hydrochloric acid combination as well. There's a lot of other supplements that I often use, to be honest, with clients. I'll be honest, I often use quite a lot of supplements for the first 4 to 12 weeks. The reality is people often live a very unhealthy lifestyle, and undoing some of that at first, supplements can be really beneficial. So some non-digestive related supplements around supporting the mitochondria and around supporting the liver can be really, really beneficial as well, reducing inflammation. So, you know, typically I might have a new client on 3 to 8 supplements for 4 to 12 weeks. But the exact ones, it's always tailored, always specific. So to put the ownership back on you, the client, the more symptoms, the more feedback, etc., that you can collect and kind of correlate, the more we can find out where your exact root causes are stemming from, the more targeted we can be in, you know, supplementation, which obviously, you know, means you're not wasting your money / getting better results. One supplement I use with clients, just quickly, mate, last one on the supplements, is often I'll have IVs. Now, IVs can be quite expensive in the UK, but if a client has digestive issues, you're not going to absorb those supplements properly anyway. Low stomach acid, candida, H. pylori, leaky gut, all of these things can massively affect the absorption of supplements. And supplements can have as low as 10 to 30% absorption rates anyway. So often if we have digestive issues, a really great thing to do, even as a one-off, but once a month for 2 to 3 months would be ideal whilst we're fixing these digestive issues, would be to have like a Mayors 1, a Mayors 2, and added glutathione if possible, IV. So I have one of these every 3 months or so. I have an extra one if I feel like I'm coming down with something. And when I was having a lot of digestive problems earlier this year, which I was having as a result of having to use a lot of painkillers, and I used quite a lot of antibiotics, I was then having one every 3 weeks for about 9 weeks. I had 3 like in a row. And it's one of those things, like some people will have them, but I didn't notice the difference. Well, if you've got no micronutrient deficiencies and no CoQ10 and no glutathione, etc. deficiencies, you probably won't notice much of a difference. But most people do. And the reason most people do is normally digestive issues and problems. So whilst we're fixing those root causes, if we can bypass that and just go straight in with an IV to the bloodstream and have those cells suck up like a 99% absorption rate, that can be really, really game changing for a lot of people in terms of their energy levels, their mood, their anxiety, their performance, their muscle contractions, etc., etc. So you're probably looking at about £150 for one of those in England, I believe. So they're not a cheap investment, but it's quite easy to spend £150 on supplements, to be honest. So if a client comes to me with enough issues, I'll sometimes try and get them to get, you know, those supplements that I've mentioned to fix the digestive problems, of course, but I won't get them to take any other supplements because there's no point. They're not going to absorb them anyway. So the supplements for fixing the digestive system, yes, but any other ones that aren't used until they've technically bypassed the digestive system and they're in the bloodstream, those ones are probably going to be fairly pointless when all of this stuff in here is happening. So actually, instead of getting magnesium, zinc, B vitamins, etc., those are all great supplements. Instead of getting all of those, which takes us maybe towards £150 anyway, I'll get a client to do, you know, vitamin C, iron, you know, those are all great supplements. Just go and get an IV. You know, you might cost you £50 to £75 more than buying all of those key nutrients, but you'll get 100% absorption. So actually, on like a milligram for milligram basis of absorption and effectiveness, it's actually way more cost effective. So yeah, I would highly recommend considering that. Not definitely doing it because you might not have any digestive issues, but most people do, and most people notice a massive benefit to having a real large dosed and full spectrum IV. I hope that answers the supplement question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it's a quite an important point you mentioned actually, with respect to I guess it can be deemed as sort of like a shiny object syndrome with regards to supplements, where people feel like, okay, well, what supplement should I take? Not necessarily to mask the problem, but it's kind of like a lot of this stuff that we've been talking about today is very out of sight, out of mind. So therefore, it's not necessarily something that people focus on so much. But actually, if you break it down, to use the analogy of like if you're going to work out, right, and you haven't slept well the night before, or you haven't eaten beforehand, you might feel sick through the workout, or actually know that you're not performing as well as you could, right? That's really easy to tell. Whereas all this stuff that we've been talking about today sometimes is quite hard to put your finger on unless you rip the puzzle apart, right? And I think, the IV thing sounds pretty decent. And like you say, you can end up spending hundreds of pounds pointlessly remembering to take all these supplements. I mean, sometimes I remember when I used to take some of them, they're like bullets, like some of the sizing, and how do you know what's even in them, you know? So no, I think, yeah, really important points. A lot to take in, a lot to, pardon the pun, digest.
Yeah.
But yeah,
make
like,
sure you do it mindfully and chew the information.
Exactly. So yeah, on behalf of the guys watching as well, like, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us, even personally. Going to take some bits away from that and hopefully improve my my health all around as well. And I hopefully, not even hopefully, I'll give you a message maybe later, and I can note down those supplements so I can give to the guys, just like the sort of the key ones that you were talking about, just as sort of like a bit of a takeaway. But and if anybody has, like you said, the cycle, any of the females that have the cycle issues and things like that, I'll send them your way for the for that little Zoom thing that you said. Might be able to help them out in that way. I the girls that are on coaching with me, I do say that I don't have the problem. I can't see it directly, but try and sort of acknowledge it, because it is a thing that affects females way differently to men, you know, especially with digestion and eating and all that kind of stuff, because the cycle is so complex. So it's nice that, you know, you've broken it down in a concise way, and hopefully you can share some more light on that as well.
Yeah, brilliant, man. I look forward to having you on the female specific menstrual cycle course. So in about 10 weeks, mate, you will be saying, you won't be able to say what you just said anymore.
Yeah, I know.
On the menstrual cycle.
We all need to learn, don't we? We all need to sort of double down on our own learning. So hopefully I can use it to give stuff back myself as well. So, but yeah, thank you so much for jumping on, and I'm sure I'll speak to you later on today anyway. But yeah.
You're very, very welcome, mate. Let me just pass this over back to you. How do I do that?
No idea.
No idea either. Let me stop the screen share. Where's the Zoom gone?
But we can just, I guess we can stop the recording and end it there.
Well, yeah, if you don't need to do anything else your end of your clients, mate, then I'll just hit end on it, because I don't know how to give you back control, actually. So
that's fine. You just hit end. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I've learned stuff today as well. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your. What time is it there in Thailand?
It's about 9:40, mate. So I'm gonna practice what I preach and unwind for bed.
Awesome, bro. Sleep.
It was a pleasure, mate. Thank you for having me on. I hope everyone enjoyed that. Thank you for the questions. There were some really great questions, like genuinely. So yeah, awesome stuff. I hope that helps, and feel free to fire over whatever, you know, further questions you've got from this to me.
Yeah, I will do. I'll sort of get a summary from the guys, and if I've got any more, I'll fire them your way. I'll bother you some more.
Yeah, amazing, mate. Perfect. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye, bro.